hours. Excellent. So I'm going to get started. I just wanted to first off start by welcoming everybody to the session 5, also known as the nuts and bolts section. My name is Darren Conley. I'm a transportation analyst on SACOG's modeling team, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. The focus of the sessions up until now have been largely a theme of look at what we have, whereas this session is going to shift a little bit by diving into using what we have, and in particular with SACSIM. Starting off, we will have Don Hubbard from WSP describing their experience using and calibrating SACSIM for some project level analyses. Following, my colleagues Kyle and Bruce will give a presentation on some of the traditionally more challenging tasks of preparing SACSIM input data. After Kyle and Bruce, John Gibb from DKS will share their approach for doing sort of a project level demographic analysis using SACSIM. So very much a theme of, well, what's it like using SACSIM is a big theme of today. In addition to SACSIM, we're also going to give a live demonstration of the PPA tool, as I promised yesterday during session 4. And while PPA is not strictly a SACSIM tool, it does use some of the same inputs as SACSIM. And plus, SACOG as an agency really wants all of you as analysts and modelers to be aware of the PPA as a tool that's freely available. It's web-based. It is a potential lightweight project analysis option to either be an alternative to SACSIM or at a very minimum to supplement SACSIM for any of the projects that you may be working on. And then finally, we will end with an unveiling of SACSIM's, well, I guess for many of you, it might be a second unveiling of SACSIM's GitHub. And Kyle will also give a brief list of highlights in the latest SACSIM model release. And a last few things I want to just mention, some housekeeping, is that the chat feature is available. If you have questions and comments throughout the session, please enter them in the chat box. We'll do our best to address them during the discussion portions of the session, but if we don't get to them, I will create a Q&A document and ensure that it gets shared out with the group. Also on that topic of questions and chat and so forth, I want to emphasize that this session really is an opportunity for all of you to engage and share your questions and experiences with SACSIM. And to that end, we have built in time after each presentation for discussion. And lastly, please remember to just keep yourself on mute unless there's a open invitation for receiving questions or comments. And all that said, I would like to start off by turning the floor over to Don Hubbard at WSP, who will talk about how WSP has performed validation and some supplemental calibration to SACSIM as part of one of their projects. So if Don, if your slides are ready, I'm happy to let you take the helm.
Thank you, Darren. Katie, why don't you? Okay, so I'm here today to talk about the calibration that we did for a particular corridor study. In this case, it was for the SR99, SR51 Managed Lanes project. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the topics that I'll cover are, first, why do a calibration? Why not just use the model as it is? Then I'll do an overview of this particular project and the corridor that we were studying. Then I'll talk about the calibration tests that we did and the adjustments that we made to the model. And then I'll close by talking about the dynamic validation results. And as you can see from the heat map that's shown in the lower right-hand corner, this particular corridor had some interesting traffic operational problems, which is what prompted the study in the first place. Next slide, please. Okay, so why do a calibration? The answer is that SACSIM is a 6-county model. It's designed to meet SACOG's modeling needs. So SACOG does air quality conformity, the MTP, SES, things like that. SACOG very kindly makes it available to other users, but it's the responsibility of those users to determine if it's fit for purpose as is, or whether or not it requires some adjustment. Since most users are doing something different from SACOG, for example, you might be doing EIRs or design studies, in most cases, some amount of adjustment will be needed. Again, this model is designed for certain purposes. If you're using it for another purpose, you should at least test it, and you should probably make a few adjustments. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this particular project, this was the study was done as a task order under our managed lanes contract with Caltrans District 3. The project was to analyze potential managed lanes alternatives for the SR99, SR51 corridor, which is shown on the right, from Elk Grove Boulevard to E Street. We use SACSIM 19 for to forecast the future demand in the corridor. And then downstream of SACSIM, we also had a toll optimization model to post-process the results. And as you can see in the top right-hand corner, what really triggered this was the fact that that periodically Caltrans has to report to FHWA on degradation in HOV facilities. This particular facility was the only one in Caltrans District 3 that was showing degraded operation in the HOV lanes. They were much below the 45 mile an hour standard. And so that prompted a study of what you could do to improve those operations. Next slide, please. Okay, so because of the nature of this particular study, we needed a model that was accurate for peak hour and peak period conditions. So we're talking about HOV lanes or hot lanes or something. Mainly we're talking about the peak hour. And we also needed a representation of highly congested conditions, as they showed in the heat map. And then on this map, there are parts that are highly congested. And if you're going to go for an express, for a hot lane, the avoidance of that congestion is why someone might be willing to pay a toll. Again, because this is managed lanes, vehicle classes turn out to be very important. So you have HOV2s that are allowed to use the facility for free, HOV3s also. If there was a change in the occupancy requirement and HOV3 was required, obviously you need a model that represents that properly. Trucks are not allowed to use the lanes, so you have to make sure that the trucks are treated properly. Electric vehicles that might be given toll exemptions and things like that. It just turns out that vehicle classes are much more important for this particular study than it might be in a lot of other studies. And also speeds relative to competing routes. If you're going to have a tolled lane and someone's paying so that they can go 45 miles an hour, their willingness to pay is going to depend on what the speeds are on the other routes. Next slide, please. Okay, so we checked SACSIM 19 as its starting point against 5 different acceptance criterias. There was and you can see what the acceptance criteria was, and that the model met the criteria on a daily basis. So if you read through the SACSIM calibration, it says it's calibrated on a daily basis. We found that for this particular corridor, it performed as advertised. On a daily basis, it's fine. But for our particular study, we're not interested in daily so much as we are in peak periods and even smaller increments of time within the peak period. And for that, the model did not meet the calibration criteria. Next slide, please. So diving in a little bit deeper, what you see here is a graph where the modeled volumes are the vertical axis and the traffic counts are the horizontal axis. And we color coded the points to show the different parts of the facility. So for example, the red dots are the northbound HOV lanes. The amber dots are the northbound main line. The darker dots are the northbound truck volumes. The blue dots are the southbound HOV lanes. The green dots are the southbound main line. And once you color code it, you can see that there's several different things going on here. For the amber dots, you can see that the model tended to overestimate traffic in the peak direction, which in this corridor was northbound in the AM. From the green dots, you can tell that it tends to underestimate traffic in the off-peak direction, that's southbound in the AM. And it was tending to overestimate traffic in the HOV lanes generally. Other corridors might have a different set of problems or possibly no problems at all. But for this, for our particular corridor, we found that there were 3 problems that were separable and could be fixed by making different times of adjustments. Next slide, please. So the first adjustment we made was to deal with the underestimate of traffic in the off-peak direction. So what we found, if you look at the table at the bottom, we compared the INRIC speeds to the SACSIM speeds for nighttime when it's free flow. And as you can see, that SACSIM was underestimating the speeds on SR99 in our corridor and SR51. So uncongested speeds on the freeway seem to be too low. On the other hand, the uncongested speeds on the arterial road seem to be a bit high. And so the tweaking that we did was to increase the free flow speed on SR99 and 51 and reduce the speeds on the parallel routes. And because I-5 acts as a alternative route and we didn't want to mess up the relationship between the two, we also increased the speeds on I-5. We did not increase the speeds on all the other freeways in the region. The reason is because the model was calibrated for something like for the region as a whole. And our philosophy was we wanted to make the adjustments needed to so that the model would respond properly in this corridor. We were not attempting to do some sort of general adjustment to the model. We didn't want to make adjustments for other places that might have some unintended consequence that wasn't needed for this corridor. So we just adjusted the things for our own corridor. Next slide, please. Okay, so the previous slide was how we dealt with the fact that it underestimated traffic in the off-peak direction. We also found that it overestimated traffic in the peak direction. So under congested conditions, the model tends to overestimate freeway traffic. And what we did with that is we adjusted the volume delay function. We added in another factor that started the decay a bit earlier and was a bit steeper. So if you see this graph, this is not the volume delay function, this is a speed volume curve. You can see the effect of the 2 adjustments we made. The red shows the original model, the green shows the adjusted model for this corridor. And as you can see, we start with a higher free flow speed, which takes care of the off-peak side of the road. And the speeds decay earlier and steeper under congested conditions. Next slide, please. The third problem that we showed in the original graph was that there was an overestimate of HO in the HOV lanes. And the reason was the model overestimates HOVs in general, at least for this corridor. Some other corridor could be a different result. So if you looked at what we found in the survey, the field surveys versus SACSIM, the overestimate was mainly in the HOV3s, which in SACSIM was showing 11%, which is very high and probably unrealistically high for this particular corridor. For a lot of studies, it wouldn't make any difference, but for our study where some of our alternatives were changing the occupancy requirements, that makes a big difference and it would distort the analysis of our alternatives. So what we did on here is we factored down the HOV3 trip table and we factored up pro rata the HOV2s and SOVs so that to maintain the control total for the number of vehicles in the corridor. In other words, we don't think it wasn't a question of they got the total number of vehicles wrong. It was a question of the vehicles were in different classes. So we tweaked it up and down for the OD pairs that were using this corridor. Next slide, please. The other thing that is pertinent to this study, probably not pertinent to very many others, is HOV violators. What you can see here in the gray, with the gray bars, is what was seen in the field data, versus the model data, which is in the green bars. So this particular corridor has a lot of HOV violators, 20% or more. And so previous versions of SACSIM had a mechanism that allowed some amount of HOV violation in the HOV lanes. The current model does not have that. And so that would distort the forecast for the HOV in a managed lane. And one of the things is it would hamper our ability to assess the value of better enforcement if you were able to eliminate the HOV violators. This we chose not to try to fix within SACSIM, which would have been very complicated, but we did fix it through post-processing when we got to the next stage. Next slide, please. We checked the percentage of trucks. We checked a number of things. We found that SACSIM was fine for 3-axle trucks in this corridor, a little bit low in the north end, a little bit high in the south end, not enough to have any effect on the result on our project, which is to evaluate several alternatives. It was fine for that. I'll say we also checked for things like whether or not SACSIM's tolling component worked, and we found that it functioned reasonably well. So not a problem, didn't require any tweaking. Next slide, please. So this shows the results at the end of the calibration process. You can see for daily AM peak and PM peak, we've got a comparison of the original and what we called the focused model. After we had done the calibration, that the model was able to meet the calibration targets for all periods. And you can see at the bottom, there's still a few points that are outside what we wish they were, but nevertheless, they're much closer to the 45-degree line. A lot of improvement specifically for the HOV lanes, which is of most concern for this study. Next slide, please. So that's all the static validation calibration. Next, we did do some dynamic validation tests. We ran a large series of those. Not going to go into most of them. Just want to point out in this particular test where we added a link to the surface road network in South Sacramento just to see if the model would respond properly. So the green links are where traffic increased. The red are where traffic decreased. And as you can see at the bottom where the link was added, the model responded appropriately. We put in a link and traffic increased on that link, and it drew traffic away from the parallel routes. The model functioned the way the models are supposed to function and represents what would happen in real life. But if you'll notice, there were spurious changes. There were other changes that would be very difficult to rationally connect with the change that we made in the network. And these occurred all over the region. And some of these, there's different natures for these things, and we'll go into it in the next slide. Next slide, please. So at the top left, you can see what some of the changes are. It's just traffic switching between the general purpose and the aux lanes. That is inconsequential to our analysis. Really doesn't make any difference. It's still the same traffic are using the same roads. Regional VMT is not going to change because the lengths are very, very close to the same. Again, the green is where there was an increase. The red is where there was a decrease. Okay. If you look at the bottom right, you can see a different kind of change. This is where you've got a route. This is on Sunrise Boulevard in Rancho Cordova, where traffic switching back and forth between Sunrise Boulevard and sort of a circuitous route that goes around it. So the Sunrise Boulevard is 0.7 of a mile. The other route is 2.4 miles and has 5 signalized intersections. So it was odd that those would be considered substitutes for each other. But if you looked at the congested speeds, then you see why. The speeds on the circuitous route are 35, 38 miles an hour, while on Sunrise it was 8 miles an hour. So what's going on there is that the model isn't representing the actual delay that would occur if you went through 5 different signalized intersections. It may be overestimating delay on Sunrise Boulevard. This sort of thing, depending on the volumes, could be consequential. Depending on what it is you're studying, if you were studying intersections, this could be important. It's certainly going to affect VMT, and if in this case the numbers are pretty small. If the numbers were large, and you were attempting to figure out what your project's effect on VMT is, having these kinds of spurious results would simply cloud the result that you're looking for. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I had shown in the previous slides were assignment-only runs, and there was some spurious changes, not a lot, probably not very consequential. We tried it again, same thing where we added that link in South Sacramento for the full model run. And what we found is doing a full model run greatly increased the amount of spurious changes because it includes changes in the OD matrix. So yesterday, Kyle was going through the very complicated demand model that SACSIM has, and it's got lots of different probability functions and some, random selection of destinations and things like that. That's all fine but you can see the result is if you run the model several times, you're going to end up with somewhat different answers. So in this particular case, the difference between the first run and the second run is that there was an increase in traffic from El Dorado County and from Placer County to downtown, a decrease from Yolo County and Sutter County. And so that's what's going on with this red and green. You can see that traffic is increasing generally from the east and northeast, and it's decreasing generally from the south and from the west, all of which is spurious. Now, if you ran the model many, many times, then the results of those random changes would probably cancel each other out. But this model does have a relatively long runtime. Doing it, running the model 100 times to cancel it out is probably not very practical. What we found out for our particular study is it's probably not worthwhile to do a full model run when you're just trying to figure out what the differences are between 7 alternatives of managed lanes on SR99. An assignment-only model run will probably give you much better comparison. The differences between the alternatives would show up in the model in both cases, but if you do a full model run, you're going to see a whole bunch of other differences that disguise the results or dilute the results. Next slide, please. So our conclusions. Most users should do a calibration prior to using SACSIM 19 or any regional model for a corridor level study. And so if you're a consultant, you should be thinking about doing a calibration before you use it for an EIR or something like that, or a design study. If you're an agency, you might want to put calibration into the scope of work for who's ever going to do your studies. The factors that need to be checked and possibly adjusted depend on the project. So what we were checking was specific to managed lanes. If I was doing a transit project, I would have been checking a different set of things. SACSIM 19 is good enough off the shelf that relatively small adjustments should suffice. The sorts of changes that we made are relatively small. We didn't have to change the structure of the model or anything, didn't fool around with the land use or anything. It was close to begin with. We were just doing the final adjustments. I would be very cautious about doing full model runs for VMT analysis unless you had some way to eliminate the spurious changes that happen from model run to model run. And with that, be happy to answer any questions people have.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Don. We'll definitely go through questions in just a minute. Just a few quick follow-ups that you touched on to what you touched on, or that one thing that SACOG will be doing, which I think might help with some of the issues you saw. Now, first off, many of the issues you saw, as you mentioned, are they're gonna come up if you're doing like project-specific evaluation with a model that's very much designed and calibrated for region-level analysis. But one thing, particularly with like you saw some issues with like some of the free flow speeds, as well as with some of the spurious assignment. We're going to be doing as part of our update for the 2024 MTP, reevaluating comprehensively a lot of the assumed free flow speeds in the model based on the observed NPM RDS speed data, and basically just updating them based on what's actually happening for free flow. And hopefully that will reduce, probably not eliminate, but reduce some of the spurious assignment, and then also some of the other issues you pointed out. But yeah, no, thank you for the presentation. And yeah, let's have people, let's open it up for questions, whether you have questions for Don or also are interested in sharing any experiences you have doing a similar undertaking. Feel free to either put it in the chat or you can ask it voice too.
Yeah, a couple of questions, Don, and thanks very much for the presentation. Appreciate you sharing all the stuff that you learned. Question had to do with the violators issue, and I wanted to find out if the counts that you're looking at violators, were they actual violators, or were they like vehicle class, like clean vehicle type or ZEV exceptions? There's a ton of exceptions that allow people into the HOV lanes. And then the same issues, like one was the count taken, and yeah, those two things.
Okay, I believe the counts were taken in 2019, so they're pre-COVID. In terms of the violators, this is being done by observation from the pedestrian overcrossing. And just observation from people there is a very high violation rate. There was, at the same time, they were looking at things like the vehicles that are exempt and that are not violators. A little harder given the decals and other things, but we believe that these are genuine violators. So in a sense, the corridor currently operates as sort of a hot lane where no toll is collected. And a certain number of SOVs are using the HOV lanes, and the toll is, the possibility of getting a ticket, once every 100 trips or something like this.
So
we think that the data is right, that there is a high violator rate, probably between 10 and 20%.
And I'm not disputing that there is a high violator rate. I'm just curious, like, if you did do counts that captured, I'm curious how the SOVs are at
yes.
Vehicle class exceptions, and if the count was sensitive to that. I'm just curious, like, is that in a separate?
We're in a separate category in the same count. And these were counts that were done by Caltrans District 3. But there were, so the categories were the single occupant vehicle, HOV2s, HOV3s, exempt vehicles.
I'll just jump in and say one of the things regarding the violators is it seemed that that number of SOVs in the managed or the carpool lane was significantly higher in the most congested portions of the corridor. So it wasn't that high throughout.
Right.
Where
Good
it gets
point,
really
Dan.
congested, then that rate would go up.
Right. The more congested things are, the greater the incentive to violate the HOV rules.
We've had pretty good luck distinguishing between 1 and 2 occupant vehicles, but the 3+ is really hard to get at with tinted back windows in the back seat. That is,
Yeah.
we take those numbers with a grain of salt. Those are tricky to get right.
Right. I totally agree with you. And you know, Caltrans was straightforward about this. That it's very hard to count the HRV3s. We believe that the counts they had of 1 or 2% probably low. We believe that the model at 11% was probably high. So I think we went somewhere between them. Okay. There is a question from one.
Oh yeah, I'll read off some of the questions. It looks like I'll start with I think Arthur Chen is the first one up there, and it's in regards to your disclaimer about, you know, there's noise between full model runs where it's hard to kind of ascribe VMT to a project as opposed to, you know, noise between the runs. So he's curious to know if that disclaimer about VMT would still be valid if somebody is basing VMT off of the trip tables rather than the assignment networks. I guess I would open that up to anybody's thoughts on whether that VMT disclaimer would still be valid.
Well,
one thing about getting VMT from skims is the skimmed distance is just on one path. The assignment at least takes a blend of paths, even if convergence is still not perfect.
There's also the issue that if you're trying to do a full model run, that if it's a comparison of network alternatives, especially like a short-term no project with project type comparison, some of the changes in destinations for work locations, school locations, those aren't going to change. So you should not do a full run and allow all those aspects of the model to change. We typically lock down the trip table for work and school, but allow things like shopping trips to be redistributed. So there are some nuances there that could make a big difference. Then I did add the comment in here about the spurious dynamic results. We saw the exact same things on the I-80 study, and the assignment criteria for convergence did have some effect, and it's something that we did change and document for that project. And I know SACOG has that, so that's available to help dampen it, at least on the assignment runs. It doesn't fully take care of the other kind of full model runs that Don highlighted.
I'm wondering whether one possibility is if, okay, just eyeballing it, right? We thought that the changes that occurred in the immediate vicinity of the links that were changed, and that makes sense. You know, the traffic went up on for the links that led to the additional link. They went down on the parallel routes. We should probably consider that VMT. The stuff that was going on in Davis or Plaza and other things, I'm just think you should just disregard those links for the purposes of your VMT calculation. Yeah, you should just zero in on where you think that there is an actual logical nexus to the change in the network.
That makes a lot of sense. Just do the VMT on a sub-area window that you consider valid or representative.
Right,
or
and
based on a set of select link.
Yeah, you can use some of that the kind of inherent noise in the model to as a filter for sub areas, but it is a problem with all simulation models, and it's a problem with most travel demand models that there is what's called spurious. Don, I wanted to get, and I do appreciate that there is those issues that come up, especially when you're doing project, no project. It's kind of the acid test for a regional model, is like you make a couple of network changes in one area, what happens elsewhere. Did you look at what the cumulative spurious changes? What was the % difference in VMT, or was it just the looking at the network changes and identifying the ones that were significant and mapping those?
We have not
Like,
gone that final step, and
Mm.
we just looked at the map and wow. So, but for all I know, I mean, it's possible the red lines and the green lines exactly cancel each other out. Very unlikely, and to some extent, they will certainly cancel each other out. But from where I'm sitting, the difference between the assignment only and the full model run was so clear that for the purposes of our project, which again, the purpose is to compare 7 alternatives, it was clear for us that the assignment only was the better choice.
Yeah, and I wouldn't second guess your judgment on that. And certainly between you and your team and Caltrans, I'm not, like I said, I'm not second guessing that judgment. I did want to get a sense of like what was the system-wide difference, and if that's part of a report, I'm perfectly happy waiting until that happens. The other thing I did want to just say is, we deal with like the variability of full model runs from another standpoint, which is there is a random seed for all simulation models, and the random seed does have an effect. There's variation around the random seed because it does affect the order of all the choices in the simulation model. For full model run, for our work, we tend to use, ultimately we're doing our work based on a single regional alternative, but we do vary the random seed and average those results, and that's standard practice for the regional stuff. It's a different issue than what you're confronting, which is making a relatively small network change when you look at the overall region and kind of deal with the noise that's inherent in most models. And the topic we have to get to is the result that we're basing our regional analysis on, the product of one random run, and we do that by just averaging a number of runs.
Yeah.
All that said, it's a constant kind of problem for travel modeling, and I'm assuming this is part of what you do in other areas as well. It's not just a unique to Sacramento process.
Yeah. Oh, you should see it. I will say, generally, the Western states have more spurious changes than the East Coast. The reason is the Western states have so many grid systems, where because a city like Las Vegas, which is laid out on an enormous grid system, there are just thousands and thousands of paths that are nearly identical. And you will get switching back and forth. It may not make much of a difference in VMT terms because they're nearly identical, but in terms of traffic assignment terms, you can get a great deal of instability.
I'd just like to, before we keep us reasonably on schedule, I wanted to go through some of the other questions that came up. It looks like, I don't know if this one was answered, but Ron from Fair and Peers, Ron, you did mention about you had similar dynamic results for your I-80 corridor project. And then your question was whether the peak period static validation done, what was the peak period static validation done for a sufficient peak period that fully captured the beginning and end of congestion, comparing peak period or peak hour demand volumes to constrained counts should reveal that the model overestimates constrained counts in congested locations.
So Ron, are you suggesting that we either take a look at a longer period rather than an hour, or possibly increase or sort of artificially increase the capacity of the links in order to find out what whether or not there's whether the capacity of the links are as artificially constraining the demand?
Yeah, so what we typically do is we separate, if we know that our peak hour or peak period is fully congested, and we want to compare statically to the demand volumes, we typically go in and break out the congested location separately and say, okay, demand volume should exceed a constrained volume in that type of setting. Or if we have the luxury of defining our peak period long enough, 5 hours, 6 hours to cover the beginning and end of congestion, then we can actually do a regular static comparison. So I was curious about that. You noted the overestimate, and I didn't know if that was just because it was a 3-hour peak and the peak period actually went 4 hours, and therefore the demand volume should be slightly higher than those constrained counts.
No, we felt like we covered the period. Though whether or not, though again, we're the counts themselves are constrained, and that's a whole nother issue. But we did find that when we did the tweaks that were discussed, we ended up matching the counts. I see there's a couple of other questions here.
Yeah, it looks like oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, so just, we did use the full 3-hour AM and 4-hour PM, which based on the INRIX speed data, that looks like that relatively well captured the congested period for the corridor.
Okay, thank you. Also on that comment, and Bruce kind of alluded to this in terms of, is this a big problem on the VMT side? In that I-80 example, we did measure full model differences in region-wide VMT and assignment only. The region-wide differences, the model off the shelf, the spurious changes contributed to about 155,000 change in VMT compared to the region-wide 58 million when just doing an add a lane type scenario. We were able to reduce that down into about 140,000 with just changing the assignment criteria. Compared to doing assignment only, the off-the-shelf model had a difference of about 20,000 that we were able to shrink down to about 16,000 with those assignment changes. So this is, 0.25% type differences. And to Bruce's point about other models, when we've tested other regional models, we've seen the spurious nature of them exceed 1% on a region-wide VMT change on this kind of test. So SACSIM is a little bit more stable than what we've seen in others.
So it's, as Ron was saying, it's a small change as a percentage of the region as a whole. But if you look at as a percentage change of the spurious change as opposed to what is actually attributable to the project, it's quite possible that the error is 3 times the effect of the project, and you're just losing it in the measurement error.
Right. And I do think, the project evaluations are the acid test of all these models. And there are a couple other comments weighing in on full model run versus assignment only. Darren, do we have time to entertain more questions, or are we gonna have to find a different?
I'll give one answer for both of them, for John's and David's. As both of you guys have signaled in your question, there's a trade-off. We can't get around that. That if you do a full model run, you might capture some additional effect, and that's true. If you do a full model run, you are going to get a whole bunch of other spurious effects that may disguise the actual additional effect. And there's just a trade-off. That's all there is.
Totally appreciate that, Don. And in the interest of time, I have a couple things to say that will kind of hopefully move us along without forgetting this. One of them is, first of all, thanks for sharing all this to Don and W, but also to Ron and Dave Tokarski and John Gibb and others who are, it's important to us to hear back this type of information, because we have, we have constraints on what we can do to the model to try and address these, what are pretty much systemic, always there kind of issues that are part of modeling. And we have to pick our battles each year, and information like this is helpful to help us make some of those decisions. We will be doing some sort of recalibration of the DaySim part of the model between now and our next plan. Some of this information and feedback is fodder for that. We're still trying to figure out if we have to do consultant work on that recalibration. Our budget is challenged, just like a lot of public agencies' budgets in this year. So more to come on that. The other thing I did want to mention is, and it came up in the first session, we do intend to do some follow-ups on what we're hearing from this user conference. The follow-up the form of the follow-up is yet to be determined. We may do a 6th session sometime in April, where we identify some of the things we need to work on further, and let you know how we're intending on following up on what we're hearing. We may just do an email with some survey work or something. There's a lot to process on the comments that were made and the information that we're getting through this user conference. We will need a week or two to at least do that, and then we will let you know how we're going to follow up. But this topic is definitely, we're hearing it loud and clear. It's a thing. We may need some additional work on this. This is part of the reason we're doing the user conference, is to identify the problems that are happening with the model in the real world and the issues that people like the assembled group here are facing. And we will follow up and let you know, even if it's to say this is too big of an issue for us to deal with and don't expect anything from us this year. We want to be transparent about where we're putting our chips, if you will. And this information is really helpful, so thanks a lot. And Darren, I'm going to turn that back to you, get off the podium and turn it back to you with that.
Thanks, Bruce. And actually, considering we started a few minutes late, we're just about on schedule, which is great. And that being said, I will, am I muted? Nope, I'm not. Awesome. I will turn the floor over to Kyle, who will discuss more about everyone's favorite activity of preparing SACSIM data inputs. Kyle, if you want to take over.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Darren, and thanks, Dawn. Really appreciate you sharing, and I want to reiterate everything Bruce said. I really do read all of your forecasting memos with the calibration validation. We're taking notes, and we really find this discussion to be helpful at the project level. Sometimes we don't have the opportunity or to do these types of validation, but this all feeds into our next calibration as we go forward. So want to reiterate thanks for that, and continue to feel free to send me questions or findings or results, and we do take those into consideration. So I want to switch gears back to the land use inputs. Yesterday, as part of the MTPSCS conversation, we had a wide range of land use inputs and forecasting, and then I quickly touched on how we build those into the SACSIM model. And from the last conference, we did have a discussion and request on streamlining and documenting this a little bit better. That's been an ongoing request. I know we're constantly trying to do this, and I just want to bring this up again and share a little bit with what we've done and what we're looking to do moving forward. Shoot. So I lost. So I put these up at the very end of the yesterday's MTP discussion. These were topics that came back as a feedback to and requests to update. Two of these were being the streamlining of the parcel file preparation and the streamlining of the population preparation. The third one, which I have an X on, is really adding kind of a user interface and friendly performance improvement. And I'm putting an X there. Really, I'm putting a little asterisk next to these two checkboxes. I think some of the work we've done is what some of you are looking for, and others are looking for something else. But hopefully this is moving us in the right direction. And then the other part I want to reiterate is really we spent a lot of time this last year updating the SACSIM model documentation and user guide. So in terms of these streamlining the parcel preparation and the population file, as part of it, we added to the user guides and updated the model documentation, and that really helped kind of give a description of what those inputs were. But a lot of this is pre-processing before we use SACSIM. I know I've done a lot of trainings with a variety of people on this call on this topic, and one thing we've heard is a wide range of different questions. Every project evaluation is requesting different updates. And so that's one of the reasons that there's not a one button solution to this at the moment. But we're trying to provide basically a suite of materials you can use to start this data preparation, and then take that and move it forward to how best fits your needs. We've had requests for scripting and project performance. We've also had requests to really just put this in a spreadsheet form, because that's what some people are comfortable with. So we've tried to put that in both ways. And I'm going to attempt what I haven't done in this conference to walk through some actual files. So Darren, let me know if you can't see my screen, but on the website, we have added in, under analysis tools, we've added this land use processing tool page. And in here, we have really this resource that provides the resources that we've added. So we talked a little bit through this processing flow chart yesterday, and really all of these processes we've built into spreadsheets and then listed out the data that's needed, and hopefully you can use those spreadsheets as a template to build for your projects. So walking through an example of these, each spreadsheet looks like this. In this particular example, this is if you want to do a project level population synthesizer and then build that to fit to run the allocation tool. So take the population and join it to the parcel file. And some of this was not explicitly written out. We had scripts and SQL scripts to do this processing. And so really what this is trying to do is just open up all of the processing that we have in a spreadsheet form that hopefully everyone can use. We did some testing internally with these spreadsheets, had a range of planners and data support that are not familiar with updating these land use processes, and basically took them as an example test case on if they could follow along. And now we're opening this up to the rest of you. So feel free to add comments and questions and send it back to us. But really, I think a lot of this includes adjustments of where the sources of where this data is coming from, and then really just being able to walk step by step through these processes with descriptions, and hopefully this will become a little more clear. Just real quickly, I'll show an example of another one. This is to convert the allocation results to the SACSIM input files. And in here, we've added all the table descriptions of the SACSIM, as well as the types and categories for each one. We also included correspondence tables to really describe how we pull everything from the ACS data and build those relationships into these pre-processing steps, as well as the final tables. And so hopefully this kind of sheds some light on some of the ways that we do this. As I've said in the trainings, this is the way that we put this together. We're always looking at improving. And I know a lot of people on this call have their own processes. So this is really a tool to just provide you additional resources to how we do this processing, and hopefully you can build upon that for your own project evaluation. And then finally, the last part I wanted to talk about, and some of you may consider this a bit more streamlining, is in the in here, we've not only included the spreadsheets, but to do streamlining and reduce processing time, we've also included our GitHub scripting. So currently we have not all of these spreadsheets scripted, but 3 of these main processes, from getting the population into the allocation tool, parcel into allocation, and then really taking the final tables of the results and formatting them into the SACSIM and DASIM user interface. And all of those are scripted currently using Python 3. I do have Python 2 versions if anyone needs them. And Darren's going to talk a little bit about our GitHub, but we're hoping that this is just a transparent way to share how we do the processing and provide any additional resources you need to make this a little more streamlined. As part of this, I've also included quite a bit of supplementary material. Currently, we have this set up as a just send a SACSIM email data request, mainly because these spreadsheets are so large. We haven't decided if we want to put them on our website, but happy to share any of them in a zip file. And currently they just live on our FTP site. So for any of this material, visit our website, contact myself or anybody on the modeling team. And we're happy to provide this, as well as the scripts are already on SACOG's GitHub. So with that, I will give it back to Darren, and hopefully we can stay on schedule, and I'm happy to answer any questions of what we have done, or take any requests of really what people would like to do in the future.
Thank you, Kyle. Excellent presentation, and I know it's not an easy task. It's an inherently complex process. And I guess from there, I just would like to see if, you know, open it up to any questions or comments. I know this is definitely a topic that arose last time. Some of the issues have been resolved, but as Kyle showed in his slideshow, but are there any follow-up questions or comments that anybody has?
Yeah, hey Kyle, it's Ron. One quick question about the methodology. It looked like this method was set up so that anybody could come in and modify a given parcel or set of parcels. But what about if you're in a situation where you need to maintain the control totals for population or employment growth, for example, which is common for VMT analysis. So if you're trying to compare, let's say, you know, a specific plan and how the increase in land supply is going to affect VMT in the region, we don't want to just add it on top. We want to basically recognize that the only thing that changed was land supply, and that therefore the control total population stays the same. It just gets redistributed. Does your methodology account for that redistribution effect?
So I think that would probably fall under really the controlling the control files that go into the population synthesizer. Currently, most of these scripts are really kind of the processing between developing that population and then bringing it back in to join with the parcel file. So I think the short answer would be no, but there are methods of controlling different geographies using the current PopGen 1.1 synthesizer that's available, and there's some documentation on that. I've tested it a little bit, but there is a little bit of adjustment that occurs to the population based on just random selection of households and number of persons per household. I am looking, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, we are looking at updating the population synthesizer for this next iteration, and I've opened it up and still would like anybody that has synthesizers that they feel does this control better to please send that to us. Currently, I'm looking at the new iteration, so there's a 2.0 of PopGen. RSG has a synthesizer that they use, and the other one I've been looking at is it's called Doppelganger, and it's Sidewalk Labs synthesizer. But if there's any other ones that people on this call know can do those controls a little bit more user friendly, I'd be happy to look at that, and we've tasked that as a priority to at least look into better synthesizers for this next round.
Hey Kyle, this is Mehul. Just a quick comment and hoping to get a feedback on control totals. So is that a good approach if you run the PopGen, do the parcel level modifications based on project, and go through the whole parcel population housing files, and then after that at the end remove what's the other project we expect that not expecting growth, and thus maintain control total? Do you think that's a reasonable approach?
Yeah, so I think if I understand that, it's you would isolate the areas with new growth, separate them from areas that you want to keep separated.
The idea is to run the PopGen and then maintain the control totals just by removing the parcel data from the parcel data. Is that
right? So the way that the synthesizer works is we do our synthesizing at the track level and then allocate that to the parcels. but really you can use any geography to do the population synthesizer. You could do it at the parcel level. And so what you could do is isolate your project, run the control at, you know, whatever geography, maybe it's TAZ or whatever it is that you feel is needed, and then basically join that back to all of the areas at the regional level that the SACSIM inputs have, where you would keep that population stable.
Okay.
And I think that's something that we'll look into, you know, building more functionality around. I know there's some requests to have this in GIS. Others really like the spreadsheet form. I think some type of Python GUI for that kind of, I think we've called it the donut method before, is something that we're interested in looking into adding to.
I think there's a larger point in Ron's question that I hope we're not missing.
Bruce, you're kind of quiet right now.
Can you hear me better now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a larger point in the question Ron was asking, and it's really coming up much more, I guess, strongly on transportation projects, just because the guidance is starting to come out for VMT analysis of transportation projects, and the issue, Ron, and I just wanted to make sure you weren't asking about. It wasn't a PopGen question. It was really, when you increase land supply in one area, what other areas should offset an increase in that area? And it's not a question of like running PopGen or the right Python script. It's a question of which areas would shrink if one area is the capacity and land use is expanded. Is that the question you were asking?
Yeah, you're on the right track, Bruce. And if you think of this through a VMT lens, that when you're doing especially large area plans, these are community plans, specific plans, and general plans, they're not changing the regional control totals of population employment. They definitely have an influence on the allocation. And so if we need to analyze a different allocation of that land supply, is there a quick and efficient way to go through the SACOG steps here to do that reallocation in somewhat of an optimized way? Right now, we all fend for ourselves in terms of where we steal it from. And the process that we have to go through in terms of the moving around and reallocation is really time consuming. But if you're trying to measure the VMT of a no project to the VMT with the project and keeping everything apples to apples, we need to have this type of reallocation method versus just adding 30,000 new units on top of the 2040 values that already exist. That would not give us a good benchmark for comparison.
Yeah, so I'm going to turn that question. We don't have a good answer to that one, Ron. I can tell you. And it is way beyond a technical modeling issue. It becomes partly a policy issue and partly a economics issue, which it's not just a travel demand model and data issue. I want to turn the question to the group here. We have people who work all around the country, I know, in this call. Is there any area that does this well that we need to be looking at and trying to emulate?
I won't say well, Bruce, but there are examples of like the UrbanSim application in Utah with WFRC. There is a process. It's pretty efficient. It's not perfect. UrbanSim tends to allocate land use to too many infill sites, and it doesn't really consider how greenfield sites compete in the real market. There's issues like that, but the process is relatively fast, so we can go in and make corrections. And it's a difference of us being able to routinely analyze land use projects in a place like Utah or in Salt Lake versus doing it very sparingly in the SACOG region because of that time and cost of making those types of changes. So that's one example anyway to look at.
And Ron, just to clarify, was that Utah DOT or a particular Salt Lake MPO?
Yeah, it's the Wasatch Front Regional Council, WFRC.
Yeah, and we could probably have a whole discussion on this. And thanks Bruce and Ron for clarifying that was really the question, is that land use reallocation. we have done a bit of research looking at urban sim and other socioeconomic land use models, and then reached out to probably 10 different MPOs, and we're really hearing a wide range of how they're using these models. They're not, like you mentioned, Ron, they're not perfect, and they're not necessarily allocating to the greenfields as they feel would be consistent with their economic change, and then they're doing additional adjustments. So currently we're tabling that, but continuing to do research and yeah, trying to find examples of other MPOs that have successfully implemented this.
The other thing that we did ask, and we didn't get a single case of an answer of yes to this, but for when we talked to other peer MPOs about their spatial economic models, and asked the question, is your spatial economic model sensitive to capture land use changes that would spring from a transportation project being added? And virtually none of them said that that was true. That you couldn't assess the potential land use impact of a single project with the tools that they had. That was really sobering to us for the amount of resource that goes into a spatial economic model, and to not be able to explore that connection between transportation projects and land use change was a little bit sobering. There's other reasons to do a spatial economic model than that, but that was one of the ones that we were really interested in, and we couldn't find anybody who was really confident enough in the granularity of their spatial economic model to do any kind of transportation project impact analysis. All that said, Ron, we could go on forever on this topic, but I do want to recognize that the question really, and it's coming up more often because of SB 743 and a heightened interest in VMT analysis and VMT impacts, both of transportation projects and land development projects. The issue of how do you maintain a control total if you want to do that type of VMT analysis as an efficiency analysis for a new land development project. There isn't a good way of doing that. And at this point, I want to give another minute for people to think and weigh in, but of areas that we should be looking at to solve this problem well, we have one example of somebody who's experienced that in another area that we could go to and sort of learn from. Are there any others that we should include in that list? And Darren, can we give this a minute just to make sure people have a chance to hit their mute button, unhit their mute button and weigh in on this? Because I do think this is really important to us. I don't want to waste the fact that we've got a national panel here, basically.
Yeah, no, I'll give a minute for it. Just if anybody has any other thoughts on this particular question.
I'm not sure if the Caliper, the Transcat developer, they have a module might help you to do the land use allocation. So I'm not sure if this can be used for us. So
appreciate that there's software out there that could theoretically do it, Jiang, and we're always do appreciate that suggestion, but we're looking for suggestions of either regions, cities, states where this topic has been tackled well, and we need to go get with them and figure out what that they've done that is successful at solving this problem for their region or their state that we can emulate here. That's really what I want is like a practical approach for doing this, and we're willing to explore that. What I don't want to do is we don't have the time to do original research and development on this and try something out. We need to follow in the path that somebody else has set for us.
If anybody else has any further questions, feel free to jump in, but I do want to keep us moving on our original schedule, and also to make sure that we have an opportunity to hear all of our next presenter as well, who's also working on a topic that I hope can spur as much conversation. Our next presenter is going to be John Gibb from DKS, and he's going to be discussing some of the work that they have done toward select link traveler demographic analysis. That is looking at the demographic characteristics of people who are traveling on a specific link or through a particular project location. And just to give some context, we invited John to come present on this topic because as I'm sure you're all aware, issues surrounding race and class and social equity have become a lot higher profile in the last few years, and definitely transportation is no exception to that. In our capacity as modelers and analysts, we're definitely a part of that transportation element for studying race and equity issues. And a big part of trying to figure out how to respond to that is to find new ways to more explicitly look at sort of demographic characteristics and social equity in the analyses that we do. And then another component is that SACOG in particular has been increasing this work in this topic, and it's kind of come to the forefront of topics that are important to the agency. Last year, for example, SACOG initiated a board-level working group on race, equity, and social inclusion to help guide how SACOG as an agency will analyze and develop policies related to social equity. And then this year, very recently, SACOG submitted a Caltrans planning grant application requesting funding to help SACOG better study and evaluate the effects that its transportation planning efforts, its investments, and its funding decisions have had on historically marginalized Black, Indigenous communities and other communities of color, along with low-income communities. So it's definitely a very important topic for the agency. And then we've also seen other attempts recently using travel models and also the Replica big data platform to attempt to do project level demographic analysis. And it's definitely an evolving area. And we think that that's why we're particularly pleased to have John come in and present DKS's approach to this, because it's definitely an important contribution to this area. And again, we greatly appreciate John coming in. And with that, I would like to turn the floor over to him.
Thank you, Darren. Let's see, and we got a good screen showing. Good. Yeah, as Darren mentioned, this is that equity concerns are raising this to a forefront, and also new data sources are giving similar, such as Replica, are also coming out there with information about who uses this or that roadway link. So next slide. Hey, do we have a next? Yes, great. Now, what we've done historically in modeling has been, you can build, of course, the trip tables that you assign, and then you can build some additional trip tables that are just of certain selected groups of people or trips, and assign them as extra variables. Now, that's kind of how we've done this historically. And this is an example of when we show the volume components at a section at I-5 and 99, where I've divided it that way, just using a matrix subdivision part into the day sim trips, the commercial vehicles, they're already a class, the trips from the airport passenger related trips, separate from those that day sim makes, the IX and XI trips, and the through trips. Okay. but the thing about the traffic assignments is we got 9 periods, and each assignment has 15 user classes. And so when we're really trying to get down into demographics, the calculations explode. So next slide. So the assignment knows basically 5 things about trips: the origin, the destination, TAZs, the period. It knows the mode or the occupancy, and the value of time class. And these are the characteristics that uniquely determine the path choice. But it doesn't know, unless you do, aside from what you can do with matrix, with additional matrices, would be whether it's from a DaySim trip or an auxiliary model. And if it's from DaySim, you don't know anymore whether it's from what the activity purpose is, or anything about the person, age, employment status, or anything like that, or the household, or any of these other demographic things that anyone could think of. So our basic problem is, how do you get those other trip characteristics that have been aggregated away when you get to traffic assignment? Next slide. Now, select link assignments can estimate the probability that any one of these user classes for an OD will use a select link. That if you pick a link and do a select link analysis and save each of the select link trip tables, that portion of the overall trip table that uses the particular link, and you save all of these separately, well, now you can get a quotient which estimates the probability that this particular origin, destination, period, occupancy, and value of time class will use that link. And aside from those characteristics, the probability is independent of other user characteristics. There's nothing about the assignment that determines path choice aside from these attributes. Next. Now, a related approach that has come up and we've seen done recently was to use a group average approximation, where you take the select link trip tables and just add them up for all the periods and occupancies and value of time classes for the day, and compare them to the vehicle trips of the day. And I would consider that a fair approximation, as long as you're not getting in distinguishing trips that have tolls or managed lanes, or whether you're concerned about distinguishing income classes or value of time classes. Now, of course, we have a little caveat here, is that the basic theory of traffic assignment equilibrium is that the link flows are unique, but path choices are not. And so the select link and the component flows are not fully determined. There's infinite number of solutions that are possible, but there is such a thing as proportional flows, and there's a research literature on that. And the assignment's multi-iteration average is still a reasonable, fair approximation of proportional flows. But even so, one assignment versus another, if you're comparing assignments between one scenario and another, you'll get spurious differences that are just that you can't even converge away by tighter convergence criteria. They're just naturally due to not being fully determined. Next. So here's a kind of a partial snapshot of the trip table expanded out as a list of the select link assignments. Okay, you got the origin, destination, period, the name of the period, and then we got columns for the 15 classes that are assigned of drive alone, share 2, share 3, and those by all the trips, just the total volume, and then the select, and then we're doing two select links at a time. So that's what the SL1 and the SL2s are. And you know, in this example, we just happened to just pick a few records from the list. And there's a case where one of the directions had all of its trips use the select link, but not the other, of course. And then a few more records where the origin destination just didn't use the select link at all. And when we turn these select link trip matrices out into text form, because it's useful in what we do next. Next. Meanwhile, we got the trip file that comes from DASIM. And this, you know, as probably everyone, most of us know, the trips that come out of DASIM come out not as a number of trips between an origin and a destination, but as a list of particular trips with numerous attributes. And they also link back to the input models, households, you know, simulated or synthesized households and persons. And these are parts of tours. The origins and destinations have purposes. We have a trip mode and so forth. And then what we're doing is some little extra computation upon it, which is we're splitting something that already does is if a trip straddles time periods, if it starts at say 8:55 and ends at 9:10, it'll assign a third of the trip to the 8 o'clock hour and 2/3 to the 9 o'clock hour. Well, that's now we're doing a little processing of these DASIM trips to actually make a separate trip record for later processing. And then also explicitly getting the vehicle trips out as you know, drive alone is 1 vehicle trip, share 2 is half a vehicle trip, and share 3 is 0.3. Next slide. So here's a selected fields from and selected records of a trip that has a period split. And again, this is just adapting from a process that's already in SACSIM. And we're just splitting the weighting factors for, in this highlighted case here is a share 2 trip, which straddles a time period and straddles 2 time periods. And we show the person trip weight and the vehicle trip weight. Next. And so now the individual link users would be either the vehicle trips or the person trips as split out in that manner, times the probability of using a link, which of course is a quotient. That probability is a quotient there. And we can choose to do this analysis for either person users, either all the people who are aboard the car or implicitly aboard the car, or just the vehicle trips. And the trips can be then, once you got it this way, you can summarize these trips on any attribute in the trip list or of the associated person or household. Next. Okay, this is sort of like a drawn as if it were a Microsoft Access query. The big bold box is doing a portion of this thing first up front in a script, because it's just easier to do it that way. But then the rest of this is as if you're doing query building in Microsoft Access. You're just showing, you're bringing in the select link trips and relating them to the trip list. And then you can also look up the person and the trip purpose or trip characteristics. You can even bring in skim data for measuring travel time and distance related things. And for an analysis we did a few months ago, Mike Malk actually did this portion of it in MATLAB. It was, it was more handy for us, for our purposes there, to do it that way rather than say Microsoft Access, or to even try to write scripts for this. But there's other ways you can do this. Next. And here's an example table. Some of us might have seen tables that look like this before, in which we summarized some trips on a section of I-5 for whether the destination of the trip is the home or actually for whether it's either origin or destination, going home or to the usual workplace or to school or something else. And we did, and there's some more of these tables next. Got them by age. And this is similar to some information that Mike Malk was sharing yesterday on when he was comparing information like this to what comes out of Replica. I don't have those comparisons handy here, but it's not just because it's not just so interesting as, oh, look at the age distribution, yeah, as much as you can do this and you can compare it to other sources like Replica. Next slide just shows another of these tables. Employment status. I think that's enough of the tables there. Income, and that's just an audit check. Don't worry about that. Go back to the income. Not going to dwell on any of these particular numbers, but this gets us a partial look at when you start getting into who uses a project. What's the income distribution? And then we haven't done this to the future yet, but we'll be interested in what happens when you look at managed lane sections. Who uses the tolled lane? Who uses the general purpose lanes? And that is part of that addresses questions of equity. I won't say I don't say it resolves questions of equity. There's more to it yet to be explored, like on who benefits from a facility, but we're at least looking at who uses a facility by demographic detail. And I'll call that good as far as the presentation is concerned, and move on to how we're going to address comments and questions.
Thank you very much, John. That's a excellent presentation, and I think very timely as well. At this point, I would absolutely like to open it up to discussion, because this is definitely, I think, a evolving area at a project level. So I encourage everybody to submit or chat in your comments and questions.
Darren, do you mind if I chip in just with a couple really quick things?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks. Yeah, first of all, I do want to mention that this work came out of a project that Caltrans is looking at on I-5. They were very generous in providing us access to the consultant work before it's all finalized, and do appreciate that collegiality from Caltrans for sure, and do appreciate the consultant team being willing to kind of share the work in a sort of an early way. So thanks. And then I did also want to mention that there's other teams on other projects have done kind of similar, are looking at this as a similar thing. So there's work, kind of other work going on like this. This DKS was very cooperative, and Caltrans District 2 was very cooperative in sort of being willing to share some of this. So thanks for that. And then I did want to put a little bit of emphasis on the point that John Gibb was making right at the end of his presentation, that I do think it's a hugely important topic of who uses a project. And I think that is going to be a part of how we answer the equity question, but it is definitely not an answer to the equity question. The equity question has to bring all kinds of policy decisions and values into the equation. And what of all this information about income and use of a facility constitutes an actual equity benefit or an equity impact. There's a policy part of this that is not represented in what we've just seen. This is really just for the group of people around this table, this Zoom table. These are the topics that we're going to end up having to engage in the coming years if we want to be supportive of the policymakers in what they want to do, which is to really connect the decisions that they're making on transportation projects better to advancing equity in our region, reducing disparities, reducing discrimination, that kind of thing. And I think that's what we're hearing from our board, is that they want to go there, but don't know how yet. And we have a little bit of a time here to figure out how we're going to contribute to that from the standpoint of data and analysis. And I think this is an important step, which we really are happy to share at this user conference to stimulate some discussion and some thought. But thanks.
Hi, this is Adrita with Parent Peers. John, really good and thorough presentation. Thank you for that. So do you have any information, or did you guys check to see how closely this data distribution matches the one with Replica or even like the entire SACOG region? Let's just pick one, say like income distribution. How does it compare to the entire SACOG region? Or if you have done Replica analysis for the same segment, how does it match with compare with the Replica?
I'd like to turn that to Mike.
Yeah, the short answer to your question is yes, we did those comparisons on several of the categories. It was 6 or 8 comparison tables. It was income, it was age, it was origin, destination, work type, it was trip purpose, it was trip length, trip durations, and others. And there are some differences, but overall, the big picture patterns were the same and very similar. But if you start getting to the weeds, and the finer you slice and dice these, the more variation you see when you do the comparisons. Overall, it was very, very reasonable comparisons, and I thought it was pretty decent, especially given that none of this information was available when this version of SACSIM was created. So you're developing a model, I don't want to say blind, but without this detail of information, without this information, and then after the fact to compare a model that has been customized for a corridor to this, I actually thought it compared favorably. Again, although when you start looking at it very, very closely, you can go, aha, it underrepresented, the 0 to 4-year-old travelers or something like that. But then again, I have my doubts about how close to ground truth Replica is. Replica is based on cell phone data, and it's very, very possible that there's very few 0 to 4-year-olds out there with a cell phone in their name. So when there's a difference, is SACMET overrepresenting travel among young people, or is Replica underrepresenting it because there's no cell phones on 2-year-old kids that are out there? I'll stop there. The answer is yes, we did do the comparisons.
Thanks, Michael. If I'm not wrong, I think Replica is also a model. It's not really a cell phone data, but yeah, I asked.
You are correct. They use the cell phone data as an input, and INRIC streetlight Replica, yeah, we should all remember what you just said. The data they give us, we use the term data, but it's actually model output or output of a process or an algorithm.
Yeah. The reason I asked this question is because we did something similar, and we found that that SACSIM's representation of household income, SACSIM was overrepresenting, or maybe Replica was underrepresenting higher income households, and those are for different areas, so it might not be an apples to apples comparison, but yeah, I'd be interested to see when your study comes out if you've done any.
Yeah, a few other things we had to be careful of to try to do an apples to apples comparison is if you're trying to trace trips back to a household in SACSIM, that leaves out commercial vehicles. And in Replica, you have to make sure that you're only using II trips that are in the modeling region and pull out the IXX, or otherwise you're comparing dissimilar trip sets. So you got to kind of think it through and be careful on what you're doing and how you're processing the data and which trips you're actually grabbing to try to give yourself a more fair comparison, let's say.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question, Adrita. Was there any, for any of the work that you've done on I-80 or you've been working on I-80 and Cap City Freeway, and I'm sorry if I've got that wrong. Is that correct?
No, I was working on it in the beginning, but we have transitioned the work to some other modeling folks in the
Yeah, and I'm curious, I haven't seen any comparisons to streetlight data like that, and if there's anything that can be offered from anybody on the call, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. I mean, we actually, like Eric Howard and I, we did a comparison for TRB equity conference. So we can share the results with you guys. But yeah, we did comparison for, we picked one of the 5 most expensive MTP SES projects. And obviously roadway projects, because you can't really, it's harder to trace back non-roadway projects. And then we compared the results we got from Replica versus SACSIM. And there was some similarities, some dissimilarities, but overall what we found was that the demographic of the people using those facilities were overall higher income than the region's average. So basically it means that those projects are benefiting people with higher income households compared to the entire region.
Thank you very much for all the questions, especially Adrita, and thank you again, John, and for the excellent presentation, and also Michael for providing a bit of extra context to it. I want to give one more minute. We are kind of pushing up closer toward 12, and there's a few other things we're hoping to cover, but just one more minute for any other questions or comments, and I'll give you a minute just in case you're like me and you sometimes fumble finding the mute button, especially if you have a bunch of windows open.
If no one else has anything, I have one final comment, and I feel like there's a lot of questions that need to be answered here. It's not just finding a good data set for validation, but when you start doing these model runs and you measure who's using the corridor, to figure out who's benefiting, you have to start doing this on the baseline, the no project, and then the project, and compare the differences. And even on something like these managed lanes project, do you do it on the managed lane only? Is that your select link? Or is it all lanes, and who's using the general purpose lanes may benefit as well because they get faster speeds when you pull traffic off of them? So which links do you select, and what do you compare to what? Is it the HOV lane in the no build compared to the HOV lane in your build, or is it all lanes in the no build compared to all lanes in the build? And it even gets more complicated than that, because once you know who's using the facility, does that give you adequate information on who benefits? Who benefits and who uses a facility might be two different sets depending on what your project is. And I'll just quit there, because this really opens up a really big can of worms and a lot of questions that still need to be addressed that I think we're only starting to encroach on.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, no, there's definitely very good detailed questions, even once you have a methodology, like what's, in terms of applying it to a project to kind of get good answers is definitely a lot of good detailed questions there. I also see, let me see, Ravi, it looks like, had one. And this is one that I think I would punt to Bruce and Kyle, but does SACOG see big data models like Replica enhancing SACSIM going forward, or sort of the reverse where SACSIM supplements a big data model like Replica?
And very good question. Thanks, Ravi. We see it as sorry, that's my dog chiming in on this question in the background. Sorry. We see the directionality being that big data, whether it's Replica or Streetlight or you name it, or INRIX, any of the big data sources, they need to contribute to us enhancing and enriching and improving our models. It shouldn't be the reverse. So we are looking as part of our pilot for insights into SACSIM about where where we need to focus improvements moving forward. We already have done one thing with Replica and SACSIM, which is to look at the issue of trips that have some relation to our region, whether they're IXXI or through trips, but aren't from but take place, but the part of the trip takes place outside of our regional modeling area, and we've used Replica to estimate the extent of that travel. There's way more that we hope to get out of it, and we are in that process through the pilot of critically looking at how well the two match up, if you will, and where we can try and get some insights into our travel model that we're not going to get from any other sources that we can use to improve the model. It's still at the front end of that process. The pilot runs through the end of this year. We hope to publish an evaluation report early in 2022, and we may find a way to share some of the early findings of that with this community before then. But yes, we intend to use Replica to critically evaluate SACSIM. We do have that issue of, like, Replica gives you information that's unique, and I truly do mean unique. And what unique means is there's one of them, and you can't. It's very difficult to. You can validate some things that come out of Replica. You can reasonableness check some things that come out of Replica, but there are many things that you want to get from Replica or any big data platform that you're not going to be able to specifically say, is this exact result correct? That's why we have these platforms. We're trying to get information that goes past what we currently know. So yeah, we're trying to make that comparison and identify areas where we can improve, and we think that there's a possibility that we will find some of those areas and more to come. You know, the pilot is not yet done, and we will be focusing on that.
Thank you, Bruce. We're pushing up, like I said, we're pushing up against our time, but again, want to thank John for that excellent presentation, and it's definitely an area that's still in development. As for our next section, I'd like to turn it over to Kyle to give just a brief recap of some of the new elements, the new files that are going to be coming out with the latest release of SACSIM, just sort of a sneak peek as to what's in there. So Kyle, did you want to just kind of give a quick recap of those?
Sure, thanks, Darren. For the sake of time, I think I'll just reiterate it in case you missed yesterday's discussion in the afternoon. We released the latest MTIP files, which consist of new scenarios from the MTP SCS. There's some adjustments to the modeling, a little bit of the script and transit, and then any MTIP projects that were changed. So I know some of you on this call have already reached out, but feel free to reach out to me and we can pass along those new files. And then, like I mentioned, we're happy to announce, and really it's a testament to Darren Conley's work. We have some change maps that we've added. We've included scenario notes and a very detailed spreadsheet on all of the MTIP project changes that are available. And then finally, the last portion is we've included a release of a master network with this, as well as a cut script to the scenarios, which include both with and without pricing for the horizon year. So I think I'll leave it at that. Most of the information is, you can access it on the website or reach out to us and give time for Darren to move forward.
Hey, Kyle, in reference to that, can you talk about, have you guys updated or are you updating, are those updated networks based on input that you've gotten, say from us and Fair and Peers on some of the, the downtown things we saw or the tolling?
Yeah, so any updates that you guys have shared back with us in terms of bugs or adjustments, we've tried to incorporate in this update. We're aware there's always going to be ongoing improvements, and we continue to build that. But the primary release of this is for the MTIP, and so any MTIP projects that have changed are in and documented in this release. But like I said, any types of bugs or changes that you guys have identified and we've identified, we've included all of this in this release.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. In the remaining time, I'm gonna switch gears and cover, as promised at yesterday's session 4, I'm just gonna give a hopefully quick live demonstration of SACOG's project performance assessment tool. So as I mentioned, it's also called the PPA. The PPA is not directly a part of SACSIM, but the relevance to perhaps to some of you all is that it does incorporate some of the same input files of SACSIM, like parcel level data and demographic and land use data. And it is, while it was used for SACOG's funding round and evaluated over 100 projects to receive competitive funding, help evaluators figure out prioritizing funding for over 100 projects recently. And it definitely is not a replacement for SACSIM. It doesn't really do any forecasting or do like cause and effect of a project, but it gives a lot of, it is a pretty lightweight, fast web-based tool and allows a pretty quick and convenient sort of analysis of environmental factors around a project that for some projects might be good enough, or for other projects it would be at a minimum a good supplement to any SACSIM work that you do, any parts of the project you use SACSIM for. So I'm just going to give a live demo of what it is. So I'll start by sharing my screen. Okay, let me see. Can you see, Kyle, can you see a page of just the project performance assessment page?
Yes, looks good.
Excellent. So I'll give the link to this page toward the end of this presentation. But if you go to the SACOG's project performance assessment homepage, this is where you end up. It gives some context to the tool, including documentation and a link to the tool itself. You open the link, and again, you don't need any special login to do this. You just need the link. You'll get a splash page. You just say, okay. And you start out with a map. And to open the tool itself, there's 2 different tools. There's a community design program tool and a regional program tool. For today's demo, we're going to focus on the regional program tool. This community design tool does a lot of the same things, but especially for this crowd, more focused on transportation projects rather than sort of urban design projects. The regional program tool is a little more directly relevant. So anyway, this is the tool interface. You have a number of inputs. And for this demo, I'm going to just zoom in and do a sort of fictional project that's inspired by a real project. we'll pretend we're doing our project is like a, let's say it's a complete streets project or bus only lanes project on Stockton Boulevard. So I zoom into where I want it, and I can literally just draw in a project line representing the project. Again, a real bus only lane project would probably be longer than this, but that works for now. We enter example project, and jurisdiction is, we'll say it's a test. And you can select the project type. For here, we'd want to do a transit expansion. The documentation gives you a lot more information on what you should select in these parameters for your specific project. And then these are goals you want your project to be evaluated on. Again, the documentation gives you more information on that. And then these are optional parameters. Depending on what you're having your project evaluated on, you definitely would want to put these in. It's like average daily traffic, posted speed limit, and pavement condition index. Again, you don't need these to run the tool, but they're definitely good to have depending on what data you want to emphasize for your project. You enter all your projects, and then you hit run. This is going to take a while, maybe 5-10 minutes. So I'm not actually going to wait for it, but when this is done, what this will do is it will have a link to download an Excel file, which is the output report. I have one pre-made right here. So after you click that link, this is what you see when you open the output. You get the cover page in the Excel file has the project line shown here, and just like a map, a context map. And the front page has just some basic information about your project. Most of it is information that you yourself entered in the interface. And then you see all these tabs along the bottom here are broken out into different sort of categories of metrics. One are metrics that are relevant to VMT, and one key thing about PPA, like I said, it's not a forecasting tool. It's more, it collects metrics about the project that based on research have a relevant connection to an outcome. So like relevant to the outcome of wanting to reduce VMT, we evaluate how many jobs and dwelling units are within the project area both now and at what are forecasted in the MTP SCS. That's just one example. Another element is the land use diversity. Is the land use nearby the project conducive to shorter trips? Or there's a lot, I don't have time to explain what the land use diversity is, but just know that a land use diversity of 1 means there's a mix of houses and schools and jobs and stuff that is conducive to very short trips because people can access a lot within a short travel time of their home.
Hey, Darren, and I want to give you we have 3 minutes left
Yep.
notification since we've been running long.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Kyle. And then there's a lot of other metrics. I'll go through just 2 other tabs, even though there's 8 of them. Others that I've been showing are free flow versus congested speeds. Safety is another big one. This is a heat map, just kind of showing collisions all around the project. It gives you a number of total collisions that happened on the project line itself over a 5-year period. It gives you a very ballpark estimate of collisions per 100 million vehicle miles traveled if you as a user entered an ADT for the project. It also breaks out collisions by whether they were bike ped collisions or fatalities. And then it also gives, let me see here. It also gives you transit service density along the corridor, like how much transit service is along the corridor and how that compares to typical corridors in a similar built environment. And it also shows like a map of bikeways. So if you're doing a bikeway project, how does that integrate with the existing bikeway network? There's a lot to look at. I hope that I could at least have whetted your appetite to do your own project reports, run your own fictional project or real project on it. So what I'll do is just transition over to a different slide that has the project tool. And you can access the project here, and then if you have, or you can access the project homepage here, which has a link to the tool and the tool documentation. And you can also email me at the address below. And one other element that I wanted to share with you again is SACOG has a GitHub now available. And actually, Katie, if you could just quickly put up a poll. I know we're running right up against our deadline, but I'd like to get a quick idea of familiarity, how familiar people are with GitHub. All right, we're getting close to everybody voting. We have about 80, almost 90% of people voting at this point. Looks like about a quarter of you have not, looks like about a quarter of you have never used GitHub before. So what GitHub is that especially if you, it's primarily used in software development world, where you have lots of different versions of programming scripts and software code. And it's basically a way that multiple people can effectively share and collaborate on developing something that's going to inherently have lots of different versions that are getting different changes happening at the same time. And SACOG has transitioned a lot of its SACSIM scripts and its other data and analysis scripts over to GitHub, just to allow sort of an easily accessible place to get the latest versions of scripts. This is following a model that was set up by RSG, which provides its DASIM scripts on GitHub that we can always get whenever we want. And also our peer MPOs up at Puget Sound and down in the Bay Area have also, they have their own GitHubs, and it's not just, its value is not just internal for us to kind of help us effectively manage and develop our scripts, but it's also a great way for us to share with all of you, where you can find access to these tools that to kind of get first transparency to see how we do what we do, and also to access the codes that we have. And if you're able to, you can repurpose them for your own ends, you can comment on them and so forth. But in any case, I encourage you to check out our GitHub, and feel free to provide any feedback that you have. And I think with that, we're at, if not past time. So I'm happy to stick around for questions, but yeah, that's the end of it.
And I'm going to cut in on you, Darren, just for a second. This is the end of the user conference for us. I see there's the numbers are dwindling, but I hope people got what they expected out of it, and maybe more. We definitely will be taking all the things that we heard from you guys through all 5 sessions. It'll take a couple weeks or so to really process it, but we will be replying back, if you will, in some form. And it may be a 6th session that we do somewhat later, or it may be just an organized email and a set of surveys that we wanted to get your input on some of the follow-ups and issues that we need to be focused on for the coming year. But do appreciate your participation in this. And I do want to acknowledge just a huge amount of work on the part of our data and analysis group here, and our communications team, as well as our administrative team. Katie, I'm looking right at you, especially on that, to transition us from an in-person meeting to a remote. And one of the questions you'll probably get is whether we want to do this remote again, or whether we want to go back to face-to-face if it's an option for next year. But do appreciate your participation, and really value we feel like 3rd year things are starting to be a little bit more of a two-way street. That's what we want. and it takes a little bit of effort to kind of make that happen and get that kind of community set up. But we're going to keep trying. And we do appreciate everything that we learned from you and all the ideas that you bring to the table here. We also appreciate you being open to hearing what we see going on in our world too. So thank you very much for your participation in this.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I want to reiterate, thanks for attending, and in particular, thanks for everybody that was willing to present and share and be part of the discussion in this virtual environment. We will send up a follow-up email for feedback. Really appreciate if you guys can fill that out. Hopefully it'll be real quick, but we do look at that and we use it for really decisions on future conferences, and it really helps us determine our priorities for our work plan. So with that, thank you very much for attending the third SACOG Modeling User Conference.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Echoing what Kyle said.
Great, thank you.